We learned today that the British did it. It was British Special Forces that paved the way, at least, lit the path, at least, for the US destruction of property worth billions belonging to one of their allies, Germany, and their current adversary, Russia, in the Nord Stream pipelines. And we learned today that the reason we know that is that the Russians were reading the text messages sent on an ordinary iPhone by the British Prime Minister to the US Secretary of State. All of that's quite startling to me, Scott. How is it to you?
It's extraordinarily startling. It's stunning. I mean, of course, if Ian Fleming was alive, we'd be reading about it as, bold and daring, he who dares kind of stuff. But it's grossly irresponsible because the pipeline, isn't a Nazi pipeline. The pipeline is a multinational pipeline that services Germany and Europe. So I guess the British decided that he who dares should dare to attack their own allies, because that's what this was, a bold, and I'm being as sarcastic as I can be, attack against Germany, against fellow Europeans, against the European economy, against Europe's lifeline. Now Europe will suffer, and there's been an effort to blame the Russians, but the only people apparently they have to blame is the British. And their American masters, by the way, because I don't believe for a second that the British would have done this without a green light from Washington, D.C.
What do you think of the code employed by the British Prime Minister? It's done, she texted to Blinken. That's deep cover, that, isn't it?
Extraordinarily deep cover. And again, I think it shows the complicity of the United States. It's done, meaning that what's done? It has to stand for something. In this case, it was the destruction of the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines. And this also points to earlier collaboration between these two countries to take out a piece of German/European energy infrastructure. It's done. Well, the only thing that's done is, her career and anybody else's career who continues to follow down this path. This is suicidal. It's suicidal for Europe and their economy. But, this is dangerous because there's news came out today that apparently the Russians have found evidence to show that the British were behind the Ukrainian abuse of the humanitarian outlet that had been created for the shipment of food, using that as a cover to carry out a drone attack against the Russian fleet in Sevastopol. How has Russia responded? They've shut down the humanitarian channel. They've closed it, saying that it's being abused by the Ukrainians and by their British masters. So it appears that England's doing everything but declaring war against Russia. And at some point in time, Britain has to understand that there will be a price to be paid by the British people. Right now they're getting away with it because apparently Britain falls into the same heroic category as the United States, willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. But if England wants to go ahead and put its thumbprint on everything, then England's going to pay a price. I don't know what that price is. I mean, I think the first price is you're going to get very hungry this winter because all of the food that was leaving Odessa was apparently headed to British, markets. But this is terrible. I mean, what does England think? This is going to be a free ride. You can attack a great nation like Russia and just get away with it, hide behind Article 5 forever, hide behind, America's skirts forever. You've been outed, England. You're a warmongering, pathetic little excuse of a nation, and you're going to pay a price.
Well, it's only exactly 100 years ago that British forces were fighting in Russia to bring about a regime change there. I'm writing something at the moment about that. So watch this space. On the war more broadly, Scott, What's your take on the current battlefield situation now? And when does General Winter arrive on the battlefield, and what will be the impact of that?
Well, my take is to just take the words of General Surovikin, General Armageddon, the new Russian commander. The situation is tense. And what I mean by that is war is hell. There's a lot of fighting going on, and men are dying on both sides, but primarily on the Ukrainian side. They're being thrown into battle unprepared, without little preparation in terms of tactics, and they're being slaughtered by the Russians, who have solidified their defenses and are fighting for the first time in accordance with their doctrine. The Russians are building up their strength while the Ukrainians are depleting their strength, and neither NATO nor the United States or Great Britain are able to provide resources in the quantities necessary to replace that which is being lost. So even if they're willing to fight to the last Ukrainian, the Ukrainians are going to run out of equipment at a faster rate than NATO can replenish it. General Winter is on his way. Let's just be very blunt about this. In Russia, lights will be on. Gas will be provided to homes. People will not freeze to death. In Ukraine right now, the electric grid is being shut down by the Russians. The Ukrainian people are going to be freezing. They're going to be hungry, and they're going to be literally operating in the dark. That's never a good thing for troops at the front line. There's going to be a lot of Ukrainians worrying about what's going on back home, especially those who've just been recently conscripted forcefully off the streets. Their will to fight will be minimal. Not only that, many of the people who are conscripted do not have access to cold weather gear. So as it gets colder, they're getting colder. Unlike each Russian soldier who has been recently mobilized, who has been handed a full complement of cold weather gear. The Russians have the ability to rotate troops out of the front lines into the rear areas to get warm, to get well fed, to get rested before they rotate back in. Ukraine doesn't have that luxury. Their troops are going to the front line where they will stay until they either are dead, wounded, captured, or they retreat under pressure from the Russian soldiers. General Winter will be used to the full advantage of the Russians. In some areas, the Russians will probably call for a lull. They're digging in. They're creating defensive lines. In other areas, the Russians will continue the attack because the Russians are trained to carry out offensive operations in the winter. And eventually, General Winter will depart the area, and we will find Ukraine far weaker at the end of winter than they were going into the winter. We'll find the nation nearly evaporated in terms of a cohesive country that is capable of feeding itself, heating itself. It will be totally at the mercy of a Europe that itself is going to be going through difficult times. Ukraine is about to become the abandoned nation of the world. And when that happens, there'll be the lowest possible fruit to be plucked by the Russian military, which hasn't forgotten why they're there to begin with.
Will the fighting continue at a high pitch, notwithstanding the winter weather? To what extent does heavy snow and very, very cold conditions alter the pace and character of events on the battlefield?
Right now, the Ukrainians are involved in very intensive offensive operations. They will not be able to sustain this into the winter. They will be compelled to fall back into prepared defensive positions. What does the snow do? Right now, the Ukrainians in prepared defensive positions have the luxury of having foliage over their head that shields them from drones and reconnaissance photographs. When the fall, the leaves fall. And when that happens, they no longer have that cover. And while you might be safe in a bunker, meaning you could avoid detection, eventually you'll have to depart that bunker to get resupplied, to take care of Mother Nature, whatever. And when you do that, your footprints will be shown leaving the bunker and coming back into the bunker. And a Russian drone is going to see that, and they're going to drop a bomb on you. They're going to hit you with artillery shells. As your vehicles move in, the tracks point a little arrow straight to where the vehicles are, and they will be destroyed. Russia has an overwhelming superiority both in the ability to detect targets on the Ukrainians, but then put steel on those targets. This winter is going to be all about dead Ukrainians. The Russians are going to be stacking them like firewood. This is going to be a very, very difficult winter for the Ukrainians. The majority of the soldiers who are going to be on the front lines are going to either be killed or wounded. There won't be too many of them left when this is done.
Now, the last time you were here, Scott, you introduced us all to the exotic practice of sheep dipping, into which I've been looking more closely. I've been looking at the names of many of the dead, the passports, pictures of many of the dead on the Ukrainian side. There's a very remarkable number of Polish names and Polish passports there. How many do you think foreign soldiers, either mercenaries or maybe even special forces from foreign countries, are fighting on the Ukrainian side?
Well, it's a significant number. I would be loath to try and put a precise number on it because, frankly speaking, I don't know. I do know that the Russians have claimed to kill tens of thousands of them, primarily Poles, a lot of Romanians, and also a smattering of people from Western countries. I do know that Russian intelligence has been speaking of tens of thousands of Polish soldiers who have been brought over and transformed into Ukrainian soldiers since this summer, and that practice is continuing. The Ukrainian army, there was an interview done with a Ukrainian Special Forces colonel, and his unit was NATO capable, trained alongside NATO prior to this conflict, was considered to be interoperable with his NATO counterparts. And he said, I've lost 80% of my men, 80%. And everybody they replaced them with have no training. These guys don't know what to do. So you call me Special Forces, there's nothing special about what my guys do right now. We can't do anything special. That's the entire Ukrainian army. They're recruiting people, mobilizing people, bringing them to the front lines, but they're not well trained. They're not elite by any sense of the word, and they lack motivation. This is the importance of the mercenaries, because these mercenaries are either sheep-dipped Polish troops, sheep-dipped Romanian troops, or they are not the airsoft, fake wannabes that came over early on, former guys who served as an admin clerk during the Afghan war who suddenly wanted to become a combat veteran and came to Ukraine only to die. The guys that are coming now are recruited as by these private military contractors who are looking for what they call executive protection experience. That's code word for the kind of bodyguard service that special forces provide. And these guys are leading the assault, and there's lots of them. We see video after video of people speaking English with various accents. But the other thing about them is, like the Ukrainians, they're dying in large numbers. They're not going to turn the tide of battle. I do think we're going to see more and more Polish troops come in as Poland prepares for what I believe to be a foolish gambit, and that is to seize Western Ukraine. It won't involve the Polish army pouring across the border because the Polish army's already in Ukraine. Entire battalions are coming over, sheep-dipped, and then joining the Ukrainian service. And those battalions can, be cleansed of whatever it is that transformed them from a wolf to a sheep and go back to being a wolf right there on Western Ukraine. And this is an escalation that I'm very concerned about as Ukraine is more and more comprehensively defeated on the Eastern Front, on the Southern Front, that Poland is going to say, now's the time, we need to act now.
Scott Ritter, I do hope your appeal succeeds on the Twitter, but whether it does or whether it doesn't, you're always more than welcome on the mother of all talk shows.